What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. And today we're talking the most recent Brothers of Destruction original special on the WWE Network, focusing on the story of The Undertaker and Kane as told by The Undertaker and Kane themselves. I believe this special was a part of some film festival, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, I heard, from WWE themselves, actually. They put out a press release about it not too long ago. And it wasn't like a movie or anything like that. It was just a sit-down interview type thing with no one else but Taker and Kane, just sitting down in an empty auditorium sharing stories about their history together, dating back to when they first met 20, 30 years ago, up until recently, including the Crown Jewel match from 2018, which I was, dying to hear about from both of their perspectives. I know Taker talked about that on the last ride, but it was cool to hear about their history from the men themselves together. It's not very often we see Taker and Kane, in this setting, period, but let alone together, so I thought that was really cool. It does clock in at around 46 minutes. It's not really a documentary, it really is just an in-depth look at the rivalry and the story between the Brothers of Destruction, and it's well worth checking out for that reason alone. So one of the first things that Kane says is that he can't believe that it's been 30 years since The Undertaker's debut. He calls him super athletic, called him one of the best to ever do it. Taker, in debuting that Undertaker character back in 1990, he studied all the slashers, he said, including Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers and guys like that. He thought of them, he thought of himself as those guys, just with more personality, and that's a great way of putting it. I mean, Jason and Michael Myers and people like that are great, but if they were in the wrestling ring, they would get boring after a while because they just continue to do the same thing. Taker and Kane are a lot like those slashers, just with a lot more personality infused there, I would say. So Kane said that he met Taker for the very first time in 1993. He came in for a tryout match, I believe in WWE, and he called Taker very intimidating backstage, because that was when he was first in the early years of the Undertaker Phenom character. And they actually faced each other. This is well documented, I believe, both Taker and maybe even, definitely Kane, maybe Taker himself as well, had mentioned this in their interviews with Stone Cold on the network. They faced each other in their first ever match, not in WWE, but in Smoky Mountain Wrestling in August of 1995. That was back when Kane was still going by the name Unabomb. I don't think that would work in today's age for obvious reasons, but he was going by the name Unabomb, which is just ridiculous. But Taker was very excited to work with him. It was very hard for him to find agile, bigger, athletic guys, big men wrestlers that could go and that could work, and as he says, walk and chew gum at the same time. And Kane says, "Oh, thanks for setting the bar so high for me," jokingly. And Taker's like, "That's not your fault. That's just the bar that was set for me and the people I was given to work with in WWE. I mean, look at the opponents that he had in WWE up to that point in 1995. He was working with Giant Gonzalez. Jesus Christ, those matches were awful. Brian Lee, Yokozuna, I mean, he's very tight with Yokozuna, or at least he was, before he passed 20 years ago, but Yokozuna wasn't the greatest worker. He wasn't given the greatest opponents to work with at that point, so it was a breath of fresh air to be working with someone as agile and versatile as Kane. So when Kane came into the company in 1995, immediately given the dumb dentist gimmick as Dr. Isaac Yankem, they both thought it was stupid. Taker thought it really limited what Taker could do, or really thought that it was limiting what Kane could do. And then he actually asked Vince about it. He's like, "Oh, you sure this is a good idea? He's a big guy. He could be doing more." And Vince said, "That's why. He's a big guy. He's scary. That's why he's a dentist." Ha ha ha. Taker's like, I don't know about that. So they actually had a match on TV, not including the Smoky Mountain match. They had another match on TV, I believe on an episode of Raw in 95-96. And that was back when he was still Isaac Yankem. And Kane called the match absolutely terrible. He blames himself for it being bad. It was after that match that Taker confronted Kane backstage and told him, "Listen, you got to be more aggressive." And Kane says that was the conversation that really flipped a switch in his head. And had it not been for that conversation, he probably would have packed his bags and gone home. So Kane found out a couple of years later that Taker needed a new opponent. It was supposed to be a one-off initially. And his name was supposed to be Inferno, and they changed it to Kane for a few reasons. One, Taker's original name in WWE was Kane the Undertaker. I don't know if it was spelled Kane. I believe it was Cain, like off the Bible, like Bible, Abel and Cain. So that's what they had going for him at that point, in addition to Bruce Pritchard's son also being named Kane as well. So that was all the factors that went into Kane becoming Kane and being changed from Inferno. So Taker thought the idea was great. For him to be his brother, he just heard that idea and thought it was absolutely amazing. And Taker was actually called Kane the Undertaker in WWE, and they actually show the announcement of him being called Kane the Undertaker. It must have been Superstars or a dark match or something, but you can hear Howard Finkel call him Kane the Undertaker, and the footage says it was from November 19th, 1990, which would have made that 3 days before it made his debut at Survivor Series, where he was called The Undertaker, which is crazy. He was that close to being called Kane the Undertaker on TV. And he wishes he could have taken credit for it because he loved the idea. He thought it was so cool. And Kane, again, was told initially that it was supposed to be a one-off, and Taker doesn't even remember who he was, supposed to face after that, or who he was being groomed for at WrestleMania, but it worked so well, they ended up building it going into WrestleMania itself. So they replay the initial vignettes and the video packages and the replays of everything that went happen going into Bad Blood 1997, including Paul Bearer, the father of destruction, saying, "Kane is alive, he's alive, Undertaker, he's your brother, blah, blah, blah." Taker said it was so over the top, but it worked. It was over the top, but it worked because just look at Taker. That would explain why he is, and why Kane is so messed up. It's just perfect. Had they done that today, it would just scream stupid. But back in 97, it worked. So they remember the rumble that they could hear from the audience when Kane debuted at Bad Blood 1997. It's one of the greatest moments in WWE history. We talked about it here on Network and Chill a million times. It gets replayed constantly, but it's so good that I have no problem reliving this moment over and over again. Kane called it the best year of his career, 97 that is, because he was out there just demolishing people left and right, which was just, it was great. He was killing people, Mankind, Vader, among other people, going into WrestleMania 14 for the match with Taker. And they also remember a segment on Raw, which I didn't even know existed, but it was December 18th, or 15th rather, 1997 on Raw. Kane slapped Taker, and that was when they were doing the whole, Taker doesn't want to face Kane, he won't face his own flesh and blood at WrestleMania, blah, blah, blah. So Kane didn't want to slap Taker out of respect. He felt really bad doing it. And Taker, I don't think, slapped him in that segment, but I'm pretty sure Taker may have slapped him backstage. So then it went from I don't want to hurt him, to holy shit, that guy slapped me so hard, I can't wait to get back at him later on in the segment. I think that's what happened. And that kind of set the stage for the WrestleMania match, in addition to Taker being thrown into a casket by Kane to the Royal Rumble in 1998 when Taker was facing Shawn Michaels in that casket match, and then lighting the casket on fire soon after on the stage. So they recall that exciting WrestleMania 14 match, how great the build was. Kane's heart was beating out of his chest, he said beforehand. The match was good, but what was really special about it was that it took 3 tombstones for Taker to beat Kane. No one, I don't think, had ever kicked out of the tombstone before. Definitely not 2, before being beaten by 3. And this was back at a time where people weren't kicking out of finishers all that often, so it was a big thing in order for something like that to happen. And it made Kane that much bigger as a result, even in defeat. So Kane ended up chokeslamming Taker through his mom's casket right after WrestleMania. Again, a segment I didn't know existed. But Kane and Paul Bearer brought out the father and mother's caskets, quote unquote. Kane demolished Taker through the casket. Just a really cool segment when they showed it back here. They started throwing lightning bolts and doing all this over-the-top crazy shit. And it worked. It worked. Again, it would be hokey in today's age. They kind of did it with Bray Wyatt a couple of years ago in the build to the Taker match at WrestleMania. It didn't really work as well as it did back in 97 for obvious reasons. But still, it worked to their strengths. And Kane mentioned how it really put drama and theater back into wrestling. And they both thought that Inferno match they had at the In Your House, what was it? Not Backlash. I forgot what the name of the show was, but it was the pay-per-view after WrestleMania 14 in April of 98, and they thought it was one of their best matches ever together. Taker was kind of skeptical about the ropes being on fire. Kane didn't care, because Taker had been there for a decade. Kane had just debuted. He thought it was cool, but Taker was kind of skeptical about how that would work, and they both remember how hot it was being in that ring. And I guess the original plan was for them to rehearse the match the night before, but I guess Kane and Bear were doing a house show somewhere, so that never actually happened. It was probably for the better because they didn't want to rehearse it beforehand. They would rather just do it and get it over with. So Kane talks about winning his first championship at King of the Ring in 1998, it just being vastly overshadowed because that show was all about Mankind and Undertaker in the Hell in a Cell match. But Taker actually played a part in helping Kane win the championship, albeit by accident, I believe, in that same match. And that kind of, planted the seeds and built the bridge for them to team up as the Brothers of Destruction. And it was something Taker had always imagined, and it lived up to the hype. They had a good run together. And Taker fell after Kane talks about, well, why did you feel the need to change up your character as the American Badass? Taker said that original gimmick, as great as it was, he felt handcuffed with it in the Attitude Era. He said initially he didn't think he would survive the Attitude Era with it, but then he said he probably would have, but it would have gotten boring and stale. He felt that he needed to change, and it was nice to have that fresh air in the form of the American Badass Undertaker. American Badass version of the Undertaker. They both remember facing Kai and Tai in a tag team match and how fun that was on SmackDown during their time as a team together. Taker thought actually the Brothers of Destruction could have gone farther than they did as a tag team. But the issue, their downfall was that they couldn't really be booked up against anyone because they would just demolish the entire tag team division. So then Kane talks about unmasking and how he was starting to get bored and it wasn't as fun for him anymore. It was a great job and he was blessed to have it, but he just wasn't having as much fun anymore because he went as far as he could with the masked Kane character. And he and Vince were the only people behind it. Everyone else was saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. He and Vince were the only people that were for that decision. Taker talked about how his only reservation about it, because Kane asked Taker's thoughts on Kane unmasking in 2003. Taker said that his only reservation was that the burns. The whole reason why Kane had a mask to begin with was because his face was burned. So taking off the mask, you would kind of have to show the burns, and they didn't really do that, blah, blah, blah. But Kane clarified, and I think he's mentioned this before, about how the scars were not physical but psychological. They were mental. They were in his head. And they were all in his mind, and how, those were the real scars, and how he thought he was deformed, but he actually was kind of just deformed on the inside, which I thought was brilliant. And I don't know if they ever actually said that on the show itself. I wasn't watching back then. I don't know, but that was Kane's logic, and I thought that was really, really smart. Because people were kind of left to wonder. Like when Jim Ross said, oh, is that a human being? What is that? When he unmasked, and it's like, yes, it is. It's a fucking human being. Like, no shit. You know what I mean? Like, he looked perfectly normal aside from a few, like, black marks on his face. He looked perfectly fine. He just had, like, a half a shaved head, which looked ridiculously dumb. And thankfully, they had him just shave his entire head soon after. So, he felt like his career was starting over, actually, with the unmasked character, and Taker was really proud of their 03 to 04 story leading into WrestleMania 20. The work itself wasn't great, like the matches and the in-ring stuff wasn't amazing, but the storytelling was good. It led to a WrestleMania 20 match. They had another run together in 2010 as a feud, and that was where Kane beat him 3 straight pay-per-views. Night of Champions at that point is what it was. Hell in a Cell and Bragging Rights, if you remember that. And I remember at the time, I think the original plan was to have Taker win that third match. And maybe this was just dirt sheet bullshit, whatever. But I'm pretty sure Taker was supposed to win that third match, win back the World Heavyweight Championship, but then he was more hurt than they thought, so they had Kane win instead. Because the whole thing was really weird, because the Nexus helped bury Taker, and that it was never paid off. He never faced off against Taker again. The Nexus did, and Wade Barrett never had a match against Taker, although I think that was the original plan. But another big part of that was that up to that point, I don't think Kane had ever really lost to Taker in a major match. So it was a big thing, and Taker really wanted to elevate Kane again. And he didn't lose a lot in his early days, so when he did, it was a big deal. And that same exact thing happened like at SummerSlam 98 with Austin, and it happened again in 2000 with Kane, which was cool. So speaking of losing, they talk about the end of the streak, which I'm really glad they acknowledged. Kane even admitted he was backstage at that Mania. I think he was in... No, he wasn't in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal that year. He was in that 6-man tag with The Shield, with the New Age Outlaws, and they lost to The Shield in like a matter of minutes, which is exactly what it should have been. That match was a complete waste. So anyway, he thought the finish to the match between Brock and Taker that WrestleMania 30, was botched, as did everyone else. And he walked out of the room that night, because he was so pissed with the finish. He was so mad the streak was over. And obviously he was bigger than the streak, but that streak had become a part of the WrestleMania lore. People went to WrestleMania from all over the world to see Taker advance that streak. And even Taker said he didn't think Brock needed it. And in Taker's own words, he was supposed to win that morning. Vince came to him throughout the day. They kind of went back and forth, but Vince went to him at one point throughout the day, and told him, listen, we're changing our mind. We're going to have Brock win. And Taker couldn't really believe it. They both agree, and you've probably seen this on news wrestling websites by now, that they both thought Roman Reigns should have been the one and would have made more sense to end the streak, and I completely agree. He lost to Roman Reigns years later anyway. So they just kind of waited a couple years, and by that point the match sucked, and Taker even said that he shouldn't have been in the ring at WrestleMania 33. He wanted to give Roman Reigns that match, and he just couldn't. The match just sucked. And speaking of matches that suck, they talk about DX and Brothers of Destruction from Crown Jewel 2018. That was a dream match for Kane at one point, and Taker thought going in it would be great, it would be easy, it would be cake given the talent involved. Given our current, despite the current circumstances, although we are old and past our primes, there's a little bit of talent in here. We could still make it work, and it just didn't. Triple H got injured 5 minutes in, Kane's mask fell off, and it had never fallen off before in any other match ever, he said. That was a first, and it was just a sign that match should not have happened. It was just a fucking disaster. So that was kind of the note they ended on, funnily enough. He just said the entire story with Kane, Taker does, that it's been a hell of a ride, and that Taker challenges anyone to go find a better story told in WWE than the one of the Brothers of Destruction, and that Kane even says they were so instrumental in their respective career paths on each other, which was huge. And, he respects Taker a lot, both as a person and as a performer. And they obviously have a lot of respect together for each other, and they're very close, which is cool too. So I thought this was great. Again, clocks in at around 46 minutes. Well worth checking out with the 30 years of The Undertaker being celebrated on Sunday, which is going to be great. There's a lot more Taker content to come here on the channel and on the WWE Network in the days to come. So on Friday on the network, they're going to have WWE Break It Down with Taker. Saturday is a Chronicle on Lana. And then Sunday is part 2 of the Undertaker podcast with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Broken Skull Session. So all of which will be reviewed at some point. It's just going to take some time. There's a lot of content going up. Miz and Mrs. is airing 2 episodes a week. Total Bellas is back. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. So I'm going to be uploading like 2 episodes a day for the next little while, which means more content for you guys. So like this video, drop a comment, share the video, subscribe to this channel for more daily content. Hit that bell button as well to be notified of every new video when it goes up, as soon as it goes up. And that's about it, folks. Be sure to check out this special. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.